Hello everyone, welcome back to Time Online Classes. Today we are going to go through the second lesson for reading comprehension. In the last class we learned certain basic fundamental ways in which to go about a reading comprehension. Some of the things that we learned were about how to identify the tone of the author, the writing style, how to get to the paragraph summaries, link them together to form the idea flow, and finally get to the central idea. So in today's lesson, we are going to apply everything that we learned. We'll start with small passages. So the handout for today is RCHO 353-2002. I hope you all have the handouts along with you. Let's start with the first question. It says, many working women and men are having to accept low-paid jobs, both in emerging and developing economies, and also increasingly in developed countries. Despite a drop in the number of unemployed in some EU countries and the US, too many people are still jobless. We need to take urgent action to boost the number of decent work opportunities, or we face intensified social tensions. Now, what does the author say in this paragraph? He gives us a scenario where there are many people, men and women, who are jobless in different types of countries, emerging, developing, as well as developed. Then he tells us what needs to be done. He tells us that we need to take urgent action. And if we don't take urgent action, what are the repercussions that we will have to face? He tells us that then we risk intensified social tensions. Now, the question says, we can say the writer of this sentence is, there are four options given. So here we have to find out the tone of the author. Indignant, what does that mean? Indignant means aggrieved, right? So when somebody is personally wronged, when the person thinks that some wrong has been done to him, then he's indignant. So has he written from a personal point of view? No. So he is not indignant. Cynical. What does cynical mean? Cynical means that one does not believe in the goodness of others. Whatever somebody else does, we feel that the other person must be having his or her own ulterior motive to do some good. That is completely irrelevant to the paragraph. So this again cannot be your answer. Concerned and detached. That's an easy one for you. Now see, look here. We discussed the importance of vocabulary. Now if you don't know the meaning of these words, what is going to happen? You will be at a loss to pick the correct answer. Now, obviously the answer to this one is concerned, because the author is certainly not detached. He's talking in a very passionate way about what should be done. So the concerned is the correct answer, right? So that was an easy one. Let's have a look at another question. It's a small one. It says, all is grist that comes to my mill, smiled the unscrupulous investment banker. The tone of the statement is in quotes, is now there are certain clues given in the sentence itself. One, the quote itself, all is grist that comes to my mill. So what does this sentence mean? What is the banker in this particular sentence talking about? He's talking about the profits. See, there's an analogy over here. The mill that is there that grinds the grains to make flour. Now in this case, all the clients that come to him, so what does he do? What does he get from them? He gets profits from them. So that was that first quote. And then after that, smiled the unscrupulous investment banker. Unscrupulous is a key word here. Positive or negative? Unscrupulous is definitely a negative term. It means it is without principles. It is used as an adjective for a person who has no scruples, who has no principles. So the person will get down to any level to achieve whatever he wants. So in this case, again the question is related to the tone of the statement in quotes. Is the person being philosophic? No, there is no philosophy involved over here. He knows very well that what he's doing is only for profit. The unscrupulous part is there. He will go to any lengths to attain and achieve his Profits, so all right. So that is ruled out. Earnest. What is earnest? When are you earnest? Yes. See, when you really want to achieve something, you desire something, you work earnestly towards it. So earnest over here, no, that's an honest and that's a positive tone. So again, the tone over here doesn't match what the investment banker is saying. Cruel. Now we have cruel and we have acquisitive. Cruel and acquisitive, both are negative tones, so we have to decide between the two. Cruel would mean having an evil intent, whereas acquisitive is that the person wants to acquire, person wants to gain a lot, wants to acquire. In this case, what does the person, investment banker, want to acquire? He wants to unscrupulously acquire a lot of wealth. So the answer for this question then is definitely acquisitive. Cruel, we cannot say cruel over here unless and until there had been an example in which, knowing very well that he is behaving in an immoral manner, he is taking money from a person who's honestly earned it, and like Shylock taking money from him, then we could have said cruel. But what is given to us, on the basis of that, we cannot use the word cruel. We say he's acquisitive. All right, now here is a lengthy one. It is not always that you have to understand a single sentence or a small paragraph. There are chances that your reading comprehension passage is going to get a number of such paragraphs. All right, let's start. We are at question number 7. Now this question says, in terms of women in film, English Winglish is perfect in its treatment of minorities. However, I think it tries harder than it succeeds. It tries harder than it succeeds. What is the it over here? The movie English Winglish. What is it trying? What is it trying? To portray women in a good light. Does it succeed? Not really so, because it says harder than it succeeds. Okay, next sentence. The first minority. Oh, so we check ourselves over here. Initially, with the first sentence, we thought that women were the only minorities over here. But then, as we read ahead, we find out that the author has other things too in mind. The first minority we see is the NRI family, who seem to have all but completely rejected their Indian culture to an extent that most Indian families living in America haven't actually reached. So the movie involves an NRI family that, even though they are Indian, they don't have they don't follow any Indian culture. They have completely given that up, which is not the case with most Indian families living in America. All right, the next sentence. They are holding a fairly traditional wedding, but they also speak primarily in English, eat almost solely Mexican foods, and are overjoyed to marry their daughter off to a white American man who is openly ignorant about their culture and not making the slightest effort to understand it. Now see over here, now this whole big sentence, lengthy sentence that is there, that has been used to support the idea that has been given in the previous sentence. Now this person, the groom over here, he says, there's a line given in quotes, wait, you guys are gonna give me a dowry, right? Now, we would know in India that dowry is looked down upon, right? Dowry, even though it used to be a custom once upon a time, yes, there is a legal penalty, yes, if somebody even asks for dowry, yes, if that person is reported. And here this person is, the sentence, the way it has been written, it means that he's, speaking in a jocular manner. He doesn't even know about the culture that is prevalent in India. Now, there are many immigrant families. There are many families like this in America, sure, but there are also many immigrant families who are still very tied to India and who already have a difficult enough time dealing with being trapped somewhere between two cultures. So here we are talking about different types of NRI families. One that has completely given up its roots, to those who are very much tied to India. And so these people, now these families, then what is the problem that they're facing? That they're trapped between two cultures. They're neither American, wholly American, nor are they wholly Indian. This is the understanding from the passage. Now let's look at the question. According to the author, how has the NRI family been portrayed in the film English Winglish? The question says, how has the NRI family been portrayed in the film English Winglish? The first option, NRI family is portrayed positively. Positively? Yes? Can we say that? No, not so. NRI family is portrayed misleadingly. What could that mean? Yes? That means that the way the NRI family is portrayed is not the actual case that is there. So maybe quite possible, because this family that has been portrayed in the movie is not representative of all the NRI families in the US. So we'll keep that in mind. We'll move to the third option. NRI family has no cultural issues, but in the last sentence we read that some of them are trapped between two cultures. All right. The fourth one, so again, there's something going on in the mind. The fourth, the NRI family has no identity issues. Now, when we go to the questions over here, go to the answer options. So 1 we ruled out earlier, 2 we said that yes can be a possible answer, 3 we did see that some of the families have culture issues, NRI family has no identity issues. Now if they have culture issues, they've got identity issues also. Yes, they're hanging in between two cultures, they don't have a specific identity. So then the correct answer over here, that the NRI family is portrayed misleadingly. The family that is present in the movie cannot represent all the other families that are there in America. Now this was a lengthy one, but it was easy to understand. So again, moral of the story, don't get scared when you see lengthy paragraphs or lengthy passages. It's quite possible that with careful reading, you're going to get to the correct answer. Now let us take up another question here. Simpson's paradox is a statistical phenomenon in which a trend appears in small data sets but differs or reverses when those sets are combined into a larger group. One of the most fascinating examples of the paradox comes from a study about gender bias in graduate admissions at the University of California, Berkeley in 1973, when roughly 44% of the male applicants were accepted compared with only 35% of female applicants. These figures appeared to show an obvious bias against women, but when the data was broken down by department, they actually showed a slight bias in favor of women. Now again, if you see, look at that first sentence. Here the author has given us the central idea in the first sentence itself. The rest of the paragraph is supporting the idea, the central idea that the author has come up with. It says that what is true, what appears to be true for small data sets may or differs or can be the complete opposite for larger groups. Now the question says, we can say that the nature of the paragraph is, now here we are talking about the style of writing. Is the author critical? No. Whom is he criticizing? He's not criticized anyone. He's just given us a scenario. So he's not critical. Exploratory. What is he exploring? Is there something hidden, something mystifying that he's exploring? Yes? I don't think so. Explanatory. Is he explaining something? Yes, yes. Is he explaining? Isn't he explaining the first sentence? Isn't the rest of the paragraph explaining the first sentence? So this can be a possible answer. Appreciative. He is not neither critical nor is he appreciative. So we are left with, some of us will be left with two options, option 2 or option 3. Now which one is closer to the nature of the paragraph? So definitely whatever issue that is there has been explored. From the example we can see that already people have checked out, and the author has also come up with certain statistics, and he's showing us, he's supporting his main idea with the statistics and the research that was there. So the correct answer over here is that he's explaining his point of view. So the correct answer is explanatory. So this is how we proceed. What we are doing in small paragraphs, we are now soon going to start with a lengthy passage. The 11th question, it says, with election day fast approaching and early voting already started, Florida is a field of electoral battle, for every vote has vast implications. A Newt win here could knock the bottom out of the Romney campaign, removing the core arguments of inevitability and electability. So where is the election taking place? In Florida, in the US. Election day is approaching, is near, and early voting has already started. Every vote is important over here. Every vote has vast implications. Every vote can change the tide, the turn of the result. He says a Newt win could knock the bottom out of Romney's campaign. Knock the bottom out of Romney's campaign. So what happens when you knock the bottom out of somebody? What happens? What are you doing to that person? Are you that person's friend? Or are you that person's foe? Or which option will you choose? Yes, Mr. Romney, the Newt win over here could knock the bottom out of Romney's campaign. So the correct answer over here is to cause something to collapse or fail suddenly. Think of it like this. So what happens when you're standing and suddenly somebody takes the floor from under you? You're going to fall down. Yes, say you're in a boat and the bottom of the boat is knocked down. What will happen? Yes, you will fall in the river and probably drown if you don't know how to swim, right? So this idiom over here, this expression, knock the bottom out of, means to cause something to collapse or fail suddenly. Okay, so here we have another question, a small one again. Yes, it says, they say sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. I can think of lower forms, but I will spare you the details, says the speaker. So the they in this particular quote is not the speaker. He's referring to others. So according to him, others say that sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. Then he says, I can think of lower forms. So according to him, is sarcasm the lowest form of wit? No. Sarcasm is better than some other things. But I will spare you the details. He doesn't let us know about what he thinks of or what he thinks is the lowest form of wit. Now, what is the speaker's tone towards sarcasm? Now, read the question carefully. This is a trick question. The question is not what is the speaker's tone. The question is what is the speaker's tone towards sarcasm. Now, is he being sarcastic? No. He's giving you his opinion directly. There's no sarcasm there. Appreciative. Now, what happens is, when you talk about sarcasm, the first thing that comes to mind is that sarcasm is a negative word, right? So then it must be, we should be looking for an option that is negative. But in this case, it is the speaker's approach towards the word sarcasm. So according to the speaker, it is not the lowest form of wit. He can think of lower forms. So he finds sarcasm to be better than some other forms of wit. So accusative is ruled out. He's not accusing anyone. Philosophic, appreciative and philosophic. Which one should we go for? He's not giving any reasoning or philosophy towards sarcasm. Yes, he's saying that sarcasm is better than some other forms of wit. So his approach towards sarcasm, he is appreciative. So now we come to the type of passages that you're going to see in your examination. The difficulty level of the passages may be the same or may be different, maybe higher, maybe lower, but this is definitely a slightly difficult one. When there are two things that come to mind, when you go through a reading comprehension, whether you should be reading the questions first or whether you should be reading the passage first. So there are these two approaches that are there. The approach that suits most students is that when you start reading, right? When you start reading, you read the first paragraph, and if you find that you're comfortable with what you're reading, what do? You carry on reading. You carry on reading, you have a good understanding of whatever you're reading. Even if not a complete understanding, a fair enough understanding, you will be able to grasp the basics and get some of the questions correct. Now, let's say you don't understand a single word of the first paragraph. You go to the second, you go to the third, and you don't understand anything. Yes? Now, why then should you be reading a passage which you're not understanding? So, obviously, then you will not be able to answer the questions. So, you read the first paragraph. If you think that it's slightly difficult, you can then go and sift through the questions and see that, okay, out of these 5 questions or 4 questions that are there, these 3 questions are doable. They are more or less direct, so I'll be able to get to them, get the correct answers to them. So go ahead and read. Just because you've read a passage does not mean that you have to answer all the questions, especially for an exam that has got negative marking. So keep that in mind. Now, all that is examination strategy, which we will try later when we are doing our tests. As of now, our main purpose is to read and try to understand everything and try our best to answer each and every question. Okay, so let's start reading. It says, Beethoven's sonatas are venerated for their range, originality, and depth. The 19th century pianist Hans von Bülow famously dubbed them the New Testament of the pianist Bible. The Old Testament was Bach's well-tempered clavier. A 20th century successor, Louis Kentner, suggested that they should be presented to the first Martian visitor as proof of the achievements of Earthling civilization. Both remarks are a reminder that Beethoven's sonatas have long possessed a status that goes beyond the notes on the page. Now, in this paragraph, we get to know that the author is talking about Beethoven, who was a pianist, right? And he has written certain sonatas. Now, what are sonatas? Sonatas are pieces that are played on instruments, as opposed to cantatas. Cantatas are those pieces that are sung. Anyway, that was beside the point. So, Beethoven was a pianist. This we can see from the passage. He was a well-renowned and a well-known pianist, so well-renowned that the two remarks that are made about him, the first one, that the first one, Hans von Bülow famously dubbed Beethoven's 32 piano sonatas as the New Testament. So they were revered like the holy books were revered. And then the second remark, that they should be presented to the first Martian visitor as proof of the achievements of Earthling civilization. So, they were given that stature. They were put on that pedestal. So they were considered to be so good. Now come to the second paragraph. A performance of the complete cycle, like the one being undertaken by Daniel Barenboim in the Royal Festival Hall from late January, is therefore a major musical venture. Why therefore? Because of the high position that they command. Who's going to play Beethoven's sonatas? Daniel Barenboim. Now, the next sentence says, but it is more than that. In venerating Beethoven's achievements in this extended way, something beyond the music is being asserted. And what is that something? So then another musician is going to play Beethoven sonatas, yes, which is considered to be a great thing, but it is more than that. It is not just paying homage or paying respect to Beethoven's achievements. Then the author states in the last line of the second paragraph, there is a moral, even religious element to the ritual. Now, he has not explained how there is a moral or even a religious element to the ritual. So that he must have explained later. So let's go to the next paragraph here. The third paragraph says, no pianist of modern times is as prominent a figure as Barenboim, whether as Reith lecturer or as one-man Middle East peace process, let alone as the widower of Jacqueline Duperrey. Barenboim has acquired a public status that transcends even his formidable ability at the keyboard, a status he has in some respects sought as much as acquired by accident. Characteristically, His Beethoven cycle is to be accompanied by 3 public discussions under the title Artist as Leader. Now, first we were talking about Beethoven, and we said that he's one of the best musicians, best pianist. Then we talk about that there's somebody who's going to perform the 32 piano sonatas, and there's a certain quality to these sonatas or to these performances which goes beyond just music. And in the third paragraph, then we talk about Barenboim. We say that the Barenboim himself is a great pianist, and even more than that, right? It says that Reith lecturer, one man Middle East peace process. Yes, he has a public status that goes beyond, transcends, goes beyond his formidable ability at the keyboard. So along with being a great pianist, he also wears other hats. So, and in the end it says that this recital is going to be accompanied by 3 public discussions under the title Artist as Leader. Now we come to the next part of the passage. The next paragraph says, we will have to wait and see exactly what this title means. Which title are we talking about? The one that was there earlier? Musicians as or artists as leaders. But I doubt he is claiming to be a political leader, at least in the conventional sense. No Paderewski he. So who's the he over here? Barenboim. Is he claiming to be a political leader? No. Who is Paderewski? Seems to be a politician as well as a musician, an artist. Okay. As Barenboim once told me in an interview, laughing loudly, if he stood for office in his country of Israel, only Arabs would vote for him. This is an interesting sentence. Now, those of you who have been following the Arab-Israel conflict would know that Israel, that part of Israel which is there, Israel has got Jews and Palestine has got the Arabs. So this feud has been going on for years, for decades between them, and from here we get to know that Barenboim was a Jew, and he says that even if he stood for election in his own country of Israel, what would happen? Only Arabs would vote for him. That means nobody would vote for him. See, look at the interesting play of words, how the author has used the political scenario to convey what he wants. The next sentence, rather he seems to be posing the question of whether great musicians can somehow offer moral leadership within civil society, as Paul Kessels or Tislav Rostropovich did. So the question over here is, this paragraph discusses that the title Artist as Leader, what does that signify? So finally we get the answer that possibly it is possible that the lectures that are going to be there will be discussing how the artist can offer moral leadership within the civil society. The next paragraph starts with a yet. Yet. Now when we have words like yet, however, nevertheless, nonetheless, yes, but, although, so we know that there is going to be a contrasting idea over here. Always pay attention to these crossover words in the passage. Now it says over here, yet the music matters too. So in spite of the fact that along with the recital, there are going to be 3 lectures on artists as leaders, which discuss the moral leadership which the artists can provide to the civil society. Music matters too. I doubt that Barenboim would be pondering the artist as leader if he was playing the complete works of Mozart, Brahms, or Debussy. Though concert audiences are familiar with cycles of the works of particular composers, like the Mahler symphonies that Valery Gergiev is performing in London this season, Beethoven projects occupy a revered place, and the piano sonatas are the most revered of all. See, we go back to what was there in the first paragraph. In the first paragraph, we started with Beethoven and how his 32 piano sonatas are very much revered, and again the author reiterates that fact over here. All right, then the next paragraph, this would have surprised Beethoven. What would have surprised Beethoven? That is the question that comes to your mind. Let's see. Not because he did not think highly of his sonatas, but because during his lifetime, hardly a single movement of any of them was performed to a paying audience in the modern manner. So, what would have surprised Beethoven? He would have been surprised that people are paying to come and listen to the recital. The American musicologist Mary Sue Morrow found no evidence of any solo piano sonata being publicly performed in Vienna between 1750 and 1810. Statement of fact. Okay, so let's move to the next sentence. Admittedly, Beethoven had not written the last six of his 32 sonatas by 1810, but the finding is a reminder that the sonatas were overwhelmingly written for private study and domestic performance. Since there was not a single no evidence is there, no evidence is there of public performance of the sonatas which he had written prior to 1810. So we can make out that those sonatas were performed for a private or domestic audience, for private study or for domestic audience, where they were performed for small groups, not in the open, not for the open public, like it is being done now. Next, the idea that a paying audience might sit through even one sonata by Beethoven or anyone else took root slowly. As so often, Felix Mendelssohn was the instigator of the performance revolution, programming the complete Moonlight at a public concert in Berlin in late 1832. Now, Berlin is considered to be the cultural capital of Europe, and so this sentence over here says that these two sentences together say that earlier no one thought that people are going to pay and buy a ticket, pay to come and listen to even one single sonata. So we see that Felix Mendelssohn was the instigator of the performance revolution. What does this mean? This means that for the first time, people were coming in paying to listen to the sonatas. The most renowned pianist of the age, Franz Liszt, was more circumspect. Though he performed the supposedly unplayable Hammerklavier in front of an invited audience in Paris in 1836, Liszt only played two of the sonata's four movements when he next scheduled it 6 years later. So here we have a comparison between the approaches of two musicians. The next paragraph. Beethoven had been in his grave for half a century by the time the modern idea of the piano recital as a source of public reflection and improvement began to rival the more entrenched view of it as entertainment. So the public recital of the sonatas, so there are two views. One is the view that it is meant for entertainment, but the new view that is now taking root much after Beethoven is that they can be a source of public reflection and improvement. By the late 19th century, this haut bourgeois seriousness exceeded even today's approach. In Wellheim, Germany, the ultra-reverential Bülow frequently programmed the last five Beethoven sonatas in an evening and sometimes played the entire Appassionata sonata as an encore. What's an encore? You know, when somebody plays, when a musician, a singer, or somebody, generally happens with a ghazal singer. So when they recite a ghazal or a poem or a couplet, what happens? The public, when they really like it, they ask for an encore. So any performance, if an encore is asked for, then some part of it is performed again. As a conductor, Bülow also played the Ninth Symphony twice in an evening to allow audience to appreciate it better. The passage continues. See, it's a lengthy passage. Throughout, when you read, when it's a lengthy passage, you can pause for a couple of seconds in the middle and in your mind go through the idea flow so that the idea flow doesn't break. Okay, the next two paragraphs. Much has changed since then, but we still inhabit an era in which Beethoven sonatas are offered up for public blessing, too much so in the view of the pianist Kenneth Hamilton, whose new book, After the Golden Age, chastises modern pianists for the fusty rituals of modern concert giving, in which the music is served up with the superciliousness of a sneering sommelier offering overpriced wine. Now, that was some sentence. So, over here, according to Kenneth Hamilton, according to the author, does Kenneth Hamilton approve of the way the sonatas are being performed to a paying public? No. He rather chastises, he scolds. The pianist Kenneth Hamilton does not approve of the way modern concerts are being performed. In his book, he chastises, he scolds the modern pianist for the fusty rituals of modern concert giving. Fusty rituals, negative word over there, in which the music is served up with the superciliousness. What does the word supercilious means? It means high-handedness, of a sneering, again a negative word. Sommelier, who's a sommelier? A person who sells wine, offering overpriced wine. So Kenneth Hamilton definitely does not approve of the way music is being performed to paying audiences. That's not a charge you can make against Barenboim. His Beethoven cycle is said to be a noisily resonant event. He clearly intends his audience to feel, as Tony Blair said in a different context, that the hand of history is on their shoulder, and when he reveals Beethoven sonatas once more to the faithful. Who are the faithful? The audience who love to listen to these sonatas. So he says that the opinion of Kenneth Hamilton does not apply to Barenboim. All right. So the last paragraph now. Speaking of the Gurdjieff Mahler cycle, booking has opened for his performance in July of the 8th Symphony, the so-called Symphony of 1,000. This is the least performed of all the Mahler symphonies, given the cost of hiring and rehearsing the choirs and enlarged orchestra. All Mahler lovers must be tempted by the prospect. But, see again there's a twist over here. But there is a snag. What is a snag? A problem. With forces of this size, a performance in the Barbican, the London Symphony Orchestra's normal venue, is out of the question. So Gurdjieff and the LSO will mount the 8th in St. Paul's Cathedral on 9th-10th July. It is an irresponsible choice. What is an irresponsible choice? To have them play the symphony at the St. Paul's Cathedral. Whatever its other attractions, St. Paul's has terrible acoustics. What is acoustics and how would it affect the music? If a hall has got bad acoustics, the true nature of the music being played is not going to reach the audience. You would have realized that most of these halls where performances are performed, they have padded seats, they have thick curtains. What happens that they have such the arrangement is such that there is no echo, and the music as it is being performed in its true pristine form reaches the audience. Now in this part over here it says that St. Paul's has terrible acoustics. That means that the musician who's playing his music is not going to reach the audience in its pure form. The LSO should have relocated the 8th to the Albert Hall for the start of the proms. What a wasted opportunity. So such a great musician playing, and the great music cannot be heard by the audience. Right, so we end here. So we have so many names in this passage. Yes, there are so many musicians who have been mentioned, but we have to mainly focus on Beethoven, Barenboim, and towards the end, Mahler. All right. Let's go to the first question over here. It says the title, Artist as Leader, left room for discussion and raised the doubt whether Barenboim would make a good leader. Are we discussing this? It's already said that he was there part of the peace process, so then he would have been a good leader. The writer's faith in Barenboim was misplaced. Definitely not so. The writer is all praise for Barenboim. Musicians can be ethical beacon lights What's a beacon light? What does ethical mean? Ethical is related to being moral, morally correct. Beacon lights would be leading lights. Musicians can be ethical, beacon lights. Remember the part we were discussing, that they can be leaders, moral, they can offer moral leadership in the civil society. So this seems to be a close answer. Let's read the fourth one. Barenboim would take to politics. No, if you remember, very clearly it was said later that he laughed at the idea, he rather scoffed at the idea that he would take to politics. He said no, that when he stood for election in his own country of Israel, only Arabs would vote. That means nobody would vote. So the best answer to this question would be the third one. So if you refer to the fourth paragraph, the last sentence, the doubt was whether musicians could offer moral leadership. The correct answer is question 3. We go to the second question. This would have surprised Beethoven. The word this refers to. The 4 options given to us: Beethoven being replicated, Beethoven sonatas being revered, that is highly respected, people willing to spend good money to hear Barenboim, a paying and appreciative audience. Now this refers to the fact that people were willing to pay to listen to Beethoven's sonatas. During the paragraph when we discussed, during Beethoven's time, this did not happen. Any performance that was there was a domestic performance or was meant for a private audience. Now this paying audience, this whole philosophy was not there during Beethoven's time. So this refers to the fact that people were willing to pay to listen to Beethoven sonatas. Choice 4 is the correct answer. The third question. The phrase "au bourgeois." Now French, see, in English everyone would pronounce it as hot bourgeois. It doesn't really matter. You need to know the meaning. Could mean, the word has an exact meaning and it means fashionable. Commonplace is the opposite of fashionable. There are other words for commonplace, like there's one word hoi polloi, which also means the common people, the commonplace. Innate means inherent, acquired. These 2 words don't fit in here at all. So for the third question, the correct answer is 1. The fourth question. In this piece of writing, the writer attempts to lavish praise on Beethoven, appreciate Barenboim's musical capabilities, make the readers feel the hand of history, highlight the soul-searching capability of a piano recital. As we said at the end of the passage, that a number of musicians have been discussed. When you refer to the second paragraph, line 4, it talks about venerating Beethoven's achievement. The 8th paragraph talks about Beethoven had been in his grave, that part. Hence, today a recital is viewed beyond its entertainment value. It is not just music, it has got more weight to that, right? The weight of history, artist as leader, so many things being discussed. So the correct choice over here would be highlight the soul-searching capability of a piano recital. The 5th question. Georgiev Mahler playing at St. Paul's Cathedral is a wasted opportunity. This we discussed in detail, right? If you remember, wasted opportunity. Why? Because people would not be able to appreciate his performance because of the bad acoustics present at the venue. So the correct answer over here would be choice 1. The real talent of Gurdjieff cannot be appreciated at St. Paul's, and the reason being the bad acoustics present there. The next question, if you look at the next question, it says match the following and say what each person is associated with. Now this question, till now we have been recalling what we understood while we were reading. Now for this question, we obviously cannot recall. No, we don't have photographic memory. So what we need to do for this question, we need to go back, cross-check for each and every person's name given over here, and then come up with the correct combination. So the correct combination, if you go back and check, would be the fourth combination. So this is a time-taking question, but then nobody should get this wrong. It is a direct, simple question. The seventh question. Mary Sue Morrow's study indicates that Beethoven had not written the last 6 of his sonatas by 1810. The last 6 sonatas were not for public consumption. The last 6 sonatas were not good enough for public performance. Beethoven did not write any more sonatas. If you look at this one, now Mary Sue Morrow's study found no evidence of any solo piano sonata performance between 1750 and 1810. This is what is written in the paragraph 6. Hence, the later sonatas must have been meant for private study. Choice 2 then is the correct answer. The eighth question. The writer uses the phrase no Paderewski he to mean. Now, who is the he that being referred to over here? If you remember, Barenboim. So Barenboim will say no to Paderewski, definitely not. Paderewski is not Barenboim. That's the opposite which we are talking about. Barenboim has no political aspirations like Paderewski. Yes. Unlike Paderewski, Barenboim has political aspirations. This is in complete contradiction to what is being said. So the correct answer over here is option 3. The next question. So there are 8 questions over here. So we have 8 questions and we are done with the passage. So how did you find the whole experience? So you would understand what I've been saying throughout, that you need to understand the passage carefully. There are certain questions that can be answered without going back to the passage if you have read it carefully and framed or formed an idea flow in your mind. There are certain questions for which you will need to go back and recheck. So that's it. So here is the key for the rest of the questions. After the class is over, take a break, take a small break. Then thereafter sit with your hand out, go through the rest of the questions, check your answers with the answer key. All the questions that you get wrong, please sit and analyze as to why that has happened. Whether you did not understand that particular part of the passage carefully, or whether you misunderstood the question, or were you in a hurry to go through to the next question and did not read the answer options carefully. So analyze where you're making a mistake so that you don't repeat the same mistake when you go through the next passage. So happy reading, everyone. Goodbye till the next class.